All right, then, thank you for staying tuned as we try to still reconnect with Abuja. I'm being joined by Dr. MUDA YUSUF, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprises there. Dr. YUSUF, thank you so much for your time. The CBN governor was on just a few minutes ago, and we're still going to connect back to Abuja to continue what he's been saying. And he has mentioned some global and domestic issues which we can't shift away from or shy away from. And what is your reaction to this? And what do you think will be the resolution at the end of the day? Of course, in a few minutes.
Well, the points that the CBN governor raised are points that are issues that are very well known to all the critical observers of the economy. A lot of global headwinds, particularly monetary policy normalization in many of the advanced economies, the hike in interest rates, and the implication of that for emerging markets, particularly with respect to capital flow reversals. So obviously, this will put a lot of pressure on many emerging market economies, and it's forcing many of them to also hike interest rates. And this is also, in a way, affecting the exchange rate because these other foreign currencies get stronger with the tightening of monetary policy. It's happening in the US, it's happening in UK, it's happening in the EU, and many other parts of the world. So these global issues have implications for monetary developments in other parts of the country, particularly the emerging markets. But the story of Nigeria is slightly different in the sense that before now, we haven't had much of inflows, either from FDI or from portfolio flows, because of some of the peculiar policy challenges that you have in the Nigerian economy. So the risk of outflows is much lower because we don't have much actually that has come in by way of inflows. So the shock on us from that channel is not likely to be much. But, well, as CBN's core mandate is price stability, inflation has continued to intensify. And now we are talking about 20.52%, which is significant. But we see how it goes. Because the CBN, of course, will continue to target inflation. The temptation is for it to continue to increase the interest rates. But we have seen a hike in rates, MPR, in the last two meetings. At first, I think that was in May, we see a hike of 150 basis points. And the meeting that followed, we saw a hike, that was the last MPC meeting. We saw a hike of 100 basis points, which brought MPR to 14%. And of course, we all know what the implication of that has been for cost of fund, especially for those who are currently exposed to the banking system in terms of credit. So the challenges are there, but what is clear is that even in spite of the hiking rates, inflation has not abated. Inflation has since been increasing, even notwithstanding the fact that we are seeing a hike in MPR. So some of us have argued that actually adjusting rates is not likely to do much in terms of moderating the inflationary pressures in the economy.
The World Bank is already raising risk of a global recession, of course, as central banks worldwide continue to increase rates simultaneously.
Yes, it's a very valid concern because what we have seen is that the hiking of rates is taking a very big toll on investment across the world. I recall only recently the US Fed chief and
YUSUF, Dr. YUSUF, give me a moment. Please, I apologize. Okay. The central bank governor is back, so let's just hear the final resolution while we take up our conversation from there.
He has gone. Does that mean that whenever inflation rises, that the MPC would increase interest rates, just like we've seen across the world among Feds and central banks across the world? Will increasing interest rates also, would it likely lower inflation? Then the third part of my question is, with this decision, Governor, how confident are you and how certain, how sure are you that this will not likely depress the economy and Nigeria's GDP? Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Governor. My name is Nduka Chejin of the Nation newspaper. So, recently, the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics released inflation figures. Now, inflation is about 20.52%. Mr. Governor, sir, we know that this is a global challenge. When do you think we will begin to see a deceleration in inflation in Nigeria? Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Governor. My name is James, a major with this day. Recently, on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly, you mentioned that non-oil exports, the proceeds from non-oil exports increased to about, $959 million. Given this, that is in the third quarter of 2022, what are you going to do to make sure that this feat is sustained? And my second question, sir, the bank recently stepped in to help checkmate what will have been a major setback in the international travel from Nigeria, with the release of $265 million to airlines to settle outstanding ticket sales. Are we expecting more of this from the CBN to ease their travel?
Good afternoon, Mr. Governor. My name is YUSUF. I work for New Telegraph newspaper. The e-Naira will be 1 year in months, precisely October. What sort of feedback do you get, given that this is a novel idea that is very rare in the continent of Africa?
And also, Governor, I have a number of questions from people who send their questions online. This one is coming from Babajide Komolafe. And he says, the e-Naira hackathon was adjudged to be a huge success. Considering the number of entries and innovative ideas brought to the fore by young Nigerians, is the bank considering tapping into the technological knowledge base of these youth future innovative ventures in Nigeria's financial system, particularly in the payment system? The next one is from Nume Akage of this day. Question is, you launched the ROT program. You said the summit will be held by annual. What are the outcomes of the maiden summit held in June 2022? Are we expecting another summit before the end of the year? And finally, from Collins Mweze, The Nation. Governor, sir, with worst of the COVID-19 pandemic now behind us, we recently reverted interest on all its interventions from 5 to 9%. Observers are keen to know what impact these interventions are. Thank you, sir.
Well, let me thank all of you for this. First question is about the fact that there's a lot of worries about inflation trending upwards globally, and wants to know, just ask the questions. How are we sure that raising rates will rein in ultimately reverse the GDP. On the first question, you all recall that at the last meeting that we held, which was in July, I was very clear in hinting that as long as we see inflation trending up, that I cannot give any assurance to anybody that we will not continue to raise rates, because we've seen rates. That is the reason we are following up. And now the September meeting very aggressively for us to ensure, to see to what can be done to rein in inflation. So, again, Nancy, what I will say is this. My answer is that I cannot assure you or anybody who says you ask the question that we will not raise rates as long as inflation continues to trend upwards. The second part is, how am I sure, or how is MPC sure that raising rates will rein in inflation? I think it's important for us to state that the time-tested monetary policy theory has shown that the one and the easiest way to tame inflationary pressure is to raise rates, and that is the most preferred options that have been adopted globally. And what does that also mean? That if you want to see the success in reining in inflation, you have to try as much as possible to raise your rate to a level that is equal or possibly even higher than inflation, so that your inflation rate must lag your policy rate. If your inflation rate does not lag policy rate or interest rates, you have to do so aggressively, because it results in what we call negative interest rate, which is in itself a disincentive to investment. So when I ask the question, how am I sure? I will say, time-tested monetary policy theory says that this is the right way to go. The reason is because if you fail to raise rates because you are afraid that raising rates, in some cases, like you said, or like you are seeing now already globally in the advanced economies, if you say you will not raise rates because it will retard growth, whether you like it or not, whether in the short run or in the long run, not raising rates will still retard growth as long as inflation keeps going up. So it is therefore imperative that you must raise rates in order to rein in inflation. Yes, it will retard growth, but it is important that you know that the raising of rate is what will help you to slow down the rate of inflation. And how will it eventually retard growth? You raise rates, you don't raise rates, you remain mute. What will happen is that consumption, eventually you'll find that consumption and investment expenditure will be affected, because purchasing power of the citizens or of the consumer will erode and completely possibly dissipate. Or you will also see that once inflation continues to bite, what you can buy the quantity of goods you can buy with some money will reduce. And that is what also helps to increase the level of poverty in your country. So you don't have a choice but to raise rates. Our own study, our research study at Central Bank has shown us that once inflation trends above 12.5, or let's even say 13%, it will retard growth. We have seen inflation in the last 4 months move so aggressively in Nigeria. So it is difficult for us, for this MPC, with all the data available, with all the research that has been conducted, it is difficult for us not to go in the very aggressive way we decided to go today. We know to some it is not what is expected, because some of them will come out and say, look, we are trying to retard growth, it will make the cost of borrowing more expensive and the rest of them, but I can tell you that this is the best option at this time that we had to adopt. So now, how are we sure that the decision will rein in inflation? I've already said it. We believe that it will. And what we have done at this meeting is to say we'll move CRR up by 5% to a minimum of 32.5%. That will move MPR up by 150 basis points. That means over the last 4 months, we moved MPR up by about 400 basis points. But at the same time, let's not forget that inflation rate in Nigeria at 20.5 is still higher than our policy rate. So which means we are still lagging. We are still in the realm of negative interest rate, which remains injurious to the economy. Now, what message do I have for the banks? We have increased the CRR, and we expect that this decision at this meeting must be seen to be potent and must achieve the effect that the MPC thinks it should achieve. What is the message? We expect that all the banks in Nigeria must fund their account by Thursday, 48 hours, because we will debit them for CRR. We will take their CRR to a minimum of 32.5%. So which means we are going to take liquidity out of their vaults by Thursday. If any bank fails to meet up with this expectation, the decision of the MPC is that we may need to, let me use may, we may need to preclude those banks from foreign exchange market on Friday and onwards until they meet this 32.5. This message is meant to underscore the fact that MPC says this decision, this very aggressive decision to rein in inflation must yield result. We do not want to face Nigerians in the next few months and we begin to take the blame for not being able to rein in inflation in spite of all the rates that we have raised. So we have decided to adopt a two-pronged approach. Increase MPR, so policy rates, so we want to see interest rate go up, and two, CRR going up because we must mop liquidity effectively out of the vaults of the banks. The second question from Chejina says, how much longer before we begin to see a deceleration in inflation figures in Nigeria? Well, this will range from one economy to another economy. But our view is that the lag period should be between 2 to 3 months. So what are we saying? This is September. As we begin to get into November, into December and Christmas, we should begin to see it begin to decelerate. And we are going to do everything possible to achieve this. Because we believe that with the liquidity out, what will it do? It will constrain, yes, we know, it will constrain using money for speculative purposes, because we are not going to sit down and allow people to go into their bank accounts and take Naira to speculate against the currency. We will not allow it, and that is the reason we will take the monies out of the vaults of the banks so that speculative use of Naira can completely be tamed in the economy. About the hunger, he talked about the fact that non-oil export, that I said that third quarter non-oil export was as high as $950 million. And I think I need to thank the banks who have been our partners in this process of trying to see to how we can depend less on foreign currency coming from revenues from crude. We've always said that in Nigeria, before we found oil, that we were surviving and paying our import bills from revenue from non-oil sectors. And we started this around mid-February. Between that mid-February and end of March, we had seen non-oil export repatriation at $62 million. And during the second quarter, it moved up to $622 million. In the third quarter, the numbers that we see is $950 million. Let's not forget, these are repatriations that benefited or that will benefit from our 65 naira to the dollar rebate. By the time we take into consideration others, maybe crude cocoa, raw cocoa export or raw cashew exports or products that do not have the kind of value addition that we think it should have, we would see that there's been considerable level of people embracing the non-oil exports as a way of doing transactions. And we are very hopeful that as this continues, we'll be running most likely in billions of dollars quarterly. And our expectation is that over time, we want to see people not coming to central bank to ask for dollars, but rather they will rely on dollars that are being sold by companies to other companies through their banks, through the INA window. That is our ultimate goal, and we pray and remain hopeful that this is achievable. The fourth question talked about the airlines. Yes, but it's important for me to say this upfront on the airlines. The sector is a sector that had always enjoyed what we call priority allocation, whereas other, I use the word unimportant sectors, maybe you're importing finished goods, you're importing some items that we don't consider to be an item that contributes positively and in priority sector to the economy. Of course, you will observe that maybe they will get 10% or 15% at best. But for other sectors where they are priority, like the airlines, we've always granted them the kind of priority that they desire, because we know people want to travel and they don't want to be constrained by the need for them to travel. Yeah, in spite of these, we've seen that the number of travels or naira value of travels for tickets issued by the airlines has increased. And when the pressure was building aggressively, we decided to release the amount that you talked about $265 million. Now, will we? Yes, we will do everything possible, and we are determined to clear the backlog, and we will consistently at all the retail interventions. As long as the accounts of the banks are funded, we will continue to make the releases to ensure that the cumulative backlog is cleared. But I think it's important for me to say this, that the airlines or the foreign airlines are saying this because they said that we should respect the bilateral air services agreement that says that proceeds of all their ticket sales must be repatriated out of the country. It did not say that you must repatriate all your dollars through the central bank. There is no law that makes it compulsory that you must buy your dollars from the central bank. When you put your money in your account, what it means is that you tell your bank to buy you dollar. Your bank will go to the legitimate or approved sources, which in this case is the INA, to buy dollars and pay for your ticket sales proceeds. If they don't find, yes, they may resort to the CBN, but it does not mean that the CBN is under compulsion to provide your dollars. Because it's good for me to say this so that people don't just rest on the conclusion, not assumption, conclusion, that the CBN is under compulsion to provide the dollars. Another aspect of the bilateral services agreement I want to talk about is that we would like to appeal to the countries where the foreign airlines are domiciled or where their flights originate, that they should please, and we please beg them to give Nigerian airlines also a chance to land their aircrafts in their countries. Also in line with the bilateral air services agreement. You cannot be having 21 landing slots in a week from your country into Nigeria, and yet you have not given a Nigerian airline that wants to land its aircraft in your country even up to 7 landings. To us, as Nigerians, this is unacceptable. And Nigerians must stand and criticize this, that it is not acceptable. What is the interest of the central bank here? When you give Nigerian airlines opportunity to land in your country, they pay, people who are traveling using these airlines will pay Naira. If they pay Naira, they will not come to the central bank or any bank to say they want to remit ticket sales. I have to be selfish to defend my country, ladies and gentlemen. The only thing they will go to their banks, or by extension go to the CBN to say they need, will be dollars to import planes, or dollars to import spares, or pay for their insurance, which is significantly lower than if they were to remit the entire ticket sales. So Nigerian airlines must be given also a chance to land equal number of planes in your country per week in line with the bilateral air services agreement. That is what we are begging for. Because we've heard about some of our airlines go to a country, they say they want to land. You have 21 landings here. Some of them have completed. We've read newspaper stories of where some of the Nigerian people are saying that they were told by those foreign countries that don't even call us to remind us that we have not given you approval to land. We will tell you when we are ready. That is unacceptable because it is not in line with BASA. And I think that Nigerians must rise to demand the right for Nigerian airlines. The 5th issue is on e-Naira. Asking for what is the feedback that we have received considering the fact that it will be 1 year. Well, some of the feedback I have here, yes, as we approach 1 year, is that we have almost hit 1 million mark on downloads, and so far 905,588 have downloaded their app. Out of it, 282,600 are currently active. So far, counts of transactions have exceeded 1.49 million, worth over 3.484 billion naira. And the breakdown is that 78,115 consumer to bank, worth about 1 billion naira. Bank to customer of 90,760 transactions, worth 945 million naira. Consumer to consumer transactions of what about value of number of about 35,800, worth about 480 million naira, and consumer to merchants, we've seen about 171,000 transactions worth over 387 million naira. We have seen downloads, 13,136 wallets have so far been created via the USSD channel. That was a channel we recently introduced about 3-4 weeks ago, and we're happy that progress is being made. So on the whole, I would say that for e-commerce, we have seen 99.946% increase between July and September, and this remains very encouraging. We believe the e-Naira is an alternative to you holding analog Naira, and and it is very convenient, and we can almost say almost entirely costless. The e-Naira hackathon that is CBN considering tapping into the technological knowledge base of this youth. Certainly, yes, we are. And we take the reason why we organize the hackathon project is for us to really discover our youths that are very versed in technology to support our e-Naira project or our digital currency. And it is expected that we would work with them to ensure that we tap their ideas so as to improve our payment system in Nigeria. Another question, the seventh question says, what are the outcomes of the Maiden Summit? Like I said, the outcomes have been very good for the RT 200. We promised that there will be two summits in a year. We held one a few months ago, and I'm sure before the end of the year, the organizers will hold another one so that we can take stock and begin to also seek people's views about how we can deepen non-oil export repatriation into the country.
All right there. Well, the CBN governor there trying to answer those questions. I still have Dr. MUDA YUSUF, who is on via Zoom. Dr. YUSUF, I'd like to ask straight up, what were you expecting? 150 basis points seems to me like a tall order.
Yes, Tulu is. I'm actually shocked. I'm here to recover from the shock of the announcement, because really this is going to hit a lot of investors, and it's going to hit them very, very hard, because the situation is already extremely very, very difficult, particularly because of issues of forex scarcity, issues of forex depreciation, issues of the cost of AGO, that is diesel, even cost of electricity. Then you already have consumers that are whose purchasing power has been weakened. I don't quite agree with the position of the CBN on this, because this is making life more difficult for those who are struggling to continue to be in business. And as far as inflation is concerned, I don't agree with the CBN that this is going to impact on inflation. Certainly not. Because it is the drivers of inflation that will determine whether this factor is a key driver or not. This is not the challenge you are faced with inflation. It's not about liquidity. The only component of liquidity that you can talk about is liquidity coming directly from the CBN itself. That's the ways and means. That's the most impactful component of liquidity that you should be talking about. And ways and means is not coming from the commercial banks. It's coming directly from the CBN itself. Credit, total credit to private sector as a percentage of credit to private sector in this economy, or credit as a private sector credit as a percentage of GDP in this economy is one of the lowest. It's about 12%. In South Africa, it's over 100%. In the United States, it's over 200%. Why am I saying this? This is to underscore the fact that the linkage in terms of credit to the private sector is extremely weak. So there's a limit to which monetary instruments can influence behavior in the private sector. So this issue of increasing MPR, tightening the CRR, is going to just make life difficult unnecessarily.
The CBN governor...
It will not achieve much.
Dr. YUSUF,
yes.
The CBN governor mentioned that for inflation being at 20.52%, I beg your pardon at the moment, and MPR still at 15.5%, he says we are still even behind, that we should be far ahead of almost close to inflation figures. So he's saying that he cannot even promise that if inflation continues to increase, he's saying something like they might continue to increase this rate. What will happen to businesses? You already talked about investors now.
No, the thing is that this will do a lot more damage to this economy. That is my own take. And that is even the position of the World Bank, advising all the CBN central banks across the world about the need to be very cautious in the way they increase the interest rates. It's even more so here in Nigeria. Because, okay, we have seen a review of interest rate in the last two MPC meetings before this one. At first, we had the 150 basis points. we had the 100 basis points, which pushed the MPR to 14%. What has happened to inflation between then and now? If this instrument of monetary policy is any significant factor in moderating inflation, has inflation come down? If anything, inflation has been going up. Now we are coming with even a much tougher position by another 150 basis points, pushing MPR to 15.5%. So all the few investors that are indebted to the banks, I can tell you from tomorrow, even from today, they'll be getting advice from their banks that interest rate has gone up. I know of some SMEs who complain that as a result of the last MPR review, the interest rate has gone up to 30%. And the way we are now, even prime lending rate will be getting close to 25%. And yet people are struggling with foreign exchange. And the CBN is not even talking about the forex problem at all. It's talking about speculators. Is it not the policy that is creating speculation in the market? So I don't understand. This is going to hurt the economy, it's going to hurt investment, and it's not likely to have any significant impact on inflation.
No, because our time has been...
people should go to I&E window. How much can you go to an I&E window? Investors have been saying it. They can even get up to 20% of their demand in the I&E window. So what do you want them to do?
Dr. Yusuf, our time is clearly far spent because the central bank governor stayed, answering questions. But let's wrap up on this note. The CRR at 32.5%, and they're saying that the banks must comply with this. That if they don't, the central bank is saying they will debit the banks. And they're saying this will definitely have a positive impact if the banks really comply. I'd like your reaction to that as we wrap up the show.
You see, my own reaction is that our regulators to at least show some courtesy to people who are in business, the companies that they are regulating. Because the kind of language sometimes that we hear from our regulators is not good for the investment environment. These are businesses that are owned by shareholders, that are being managed by professionals. I mean, we're not in a military setting. So generally, I think our regulators should be more cautious in the way they go about, relating with companies and investors in the economy. I mean, this is just coming now, and look at the way the CBN was talking that by tomorrow they will debit account and so on. Whoever foresaw this kind of thing, So I don't think this approach to economic governance is the best. I think it can be a lot more better, and we need to show courtesy to those who are investors in this economy, because they are the people who are making the economy work. They are the people creating the jobs. So the fact that someone is a regulator does not mean that you just talk down on investors in the economy. It should not be that way. There should be mutual respect.
All right, there's a good way to live. I must thank you, Dr. MUDA YUSUF. We need to have more time to talk about this subject of discourse. It's very important as it means a lot to Nigerian economy. We'll definitely get back and see how we can talk more around this new development from the CBN. Dr. MUDA YUSUF is the Chief Executive Officer of the Center for Promotion of Private Enterprises there, bearing his mind on this recent move by the CBN. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Well, that's our show today. Thank you so much for being a part of it. I'll see you tomorrow, same time.